Welcome, thinkers, to Season 3, Episode 6 of Thinking Critically. Today's topic is editing. And today I'm joined by Michael Corley. Thank you ever so much for joining us today, Michael. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, thank you, Danilo. My name is Michael Corley. I'm a voice actor, magician, and podcaster. And for the past 4 years, I've been the dungeon master for the Chafing Armor podcast. And just to summarize that very briefly, Chafing Armor is a real play Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 homebrew rules where Marezi the half-orc barbarian, Tix the gnome paladin, Athora the tiefling fighter, Penton the spell-scale sorcerer, and Distant Bells the kinku rogue are on a mission from God to heal a mystic staff and save the world, all while riding a necromantic chicken hut.
Okay, that's quite the elevator pitch. Consider my interest piqued. Well, thank you ever so much for joining us today, Michael.
Absolutely.
The topic of today's discussion is editing. So what does that mean to you in the D&D and wider ttrpg framework?
Well, editing is very near and dear to my heart. My university degree is in radio, television, film with an emphasis on audio editing. So that was literally what I went to school to do, and then promptly did not do it for any of my day jobs, as it were. So as often happens with people in roles like that. So, but I love editing. And when I watch movies, when I listen to things, I'm always paying attention to the editing because it just really makes such a tremendous difference. The biggest thing that I'm the biggest proponent of when it comes to editing is clarity. That's what I want to. I want you, if you are considering editing your podcast, and I definitely recommend that you should, that you should start with that. Is how can I make this as clear to the listener as possible? If I'm failing at that, nothing else matters. It doesn't matter how great the music is if the music overwhelms the player's voice. It doesn't matter how great that sound effect is if it's in the wrong place and confuses people. You know, and that's why I think when you are considering editing your show, you should think about clarity first.
Okay, so do you mean, let's define what you could mean by clarity there, because as soon as you mentioned it to me, that to me, you know, a non-educated, a non-audio engineer educated person either means quality of the audio signal, for please excuse my ignorance, but you know, just how well it sounds. And I realize the irony of, you know, people are listening to this now probably going, well, it doesn't sound very good. And then versus the other side of that clarity coin in terms of like information. So like making sure that the content is clear, the content has clarity. So are those, you know, how do you kind of split a difference between those two definitions?
Well, I absolutely mean both. And it's a balancing act between the two. You absolutely, and as the conversation goes on, I'm going to talk specifically about things you can do for the audio clarity that, you know, you want your player, your different voices and the sound effects and the music and everything to be understood, but also the storytelling. And obviously, any episodic type thing, the storytelling is going to be very important. But my goodness, how could it be more important than when it's a Dungeons and Dragons or other, you know, role playing game where you are literally telling a collaborative story? The choices you make in editing are going to make the difference between people understanding what's going on and being very, very confused.
Yeah, that's a classic. I'm very proud of this segue I'm about to talk about here, that it's literally just come to me. I think that's a similar kind of issue to there's an age-old discussion is whether the DM should do the last session recap or whether the players should, and there's you know, pros and cons to both arguments, and pretty much it boils down to whatever you guys want to do is make sense for your game. There's no one right answer, obviously. But one of the criticisms against, well, actually both of those, both the DM and the players giving the last session recap, is that they might miss critical information. So from the DM's perspective, they might do the recap and either skip things that the players thought were important but weren't actually important, and have thereby kind of shown their hand a little bit. And likewise might just miss things because to the DM it's, oh, well, of course they'll know that. That's trivial. So I'm not going to bother. I'm not going to bore them with that information again, when in reality the players would be lost without it. And vice versa. The players might grossly misunderstand something and skip over bits that were important that they think aren't important. And I think that's the same with kind of like editing the actual play, especially if you're living it, if you're playing it or running that game and then also responsible for editing it. I imagine it can be sometimes difficult to see the wood for the trees and be like, is that bit really important? No, I'll cut it out because I know we were just goofing around at the table and it doesn't really mean anything important. But then you might actually be surgically removing like the soul, for lack of a better term, of the show. This is all what I'm hypothesizing, having not had to edit an actual play before. But am I broadly in the right? Is this wild speculation in any way grounded in anything?
No, you're absolutely right. And to start with what you first said, which is, should the dungeon master or the players recap? There, like you said, there's valid arguments to both. The reason I recap at the beginning is because I personally, if I listen to a podcast, I want to get to the action as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
I'm not mad at people if they want. I have shows that I love, but my goodness, they spend a solid 10 minutes just gibbity gabbiting.
Mm-hmm.
And I will literally just hit the scrub, boop, 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 and I'll skip forward like 5 minutes and then say, oh, are they talking about the subject yet? Nope. Boop, 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 boop. And so I want to make a show that I would want to listen to. And so if on a normal Chafing Armor, it starts with my voice. I personally like it when you hear a human voice first. I'm not mad at somebody if their music is first, but it says Chafing Armor Podcast, episode 123, Death Woes. And then the music hits. The music is 10 seconds long, just long enough to be music, to be intro, but short enough that they don't want to skip through it.
Mm-hmm.
And it fades out, and then it comes back. Welcome back to the Chafing Armor Podcast. And I go right into, I introduce all of the players because I want to make sure that they are all introduced. And I have them tell us who they're going to be playing. And then I very briefly recap. And I could absolutely, have a roster where each player recaps the last episode. But I want to get to the action. Mm-hmm. And so that's a choice that I made out of expediency because I know that I can very, very succinctly do it and get us to the show more quickly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, so if I left the recap to my players, well, that would be half the session on any given session of them, talking about just jokes and goofing around and this, that, and the other. So I think for my game, the reason I do it is it's a very clear bookend to be like, right, pre-game banter is, we don't care about what you're having for dinner anymore. Your life, that is now over. The game has begun, and it's a very clear line in the sand to be like, here's me talking for 50 seconds. Use those 50 seconds to kind of occupy the headspace of your character rather than kind of slowly meander your way into the role play zones. That's why I do it at my home table, of course. But to leapfrog off of another point you made there about the kind of the opening of a podcast, funnily enough, I was looking recently at listener stats and how to improve engagement and retention and all that kind of stuff, and it's shocking to a naive person such as myself how much like long intros can impact retention. So I totally get why you're like 10 seconds of music and no more, because people will just, especially new listeners, will just be like, what is, I don't care, boom, done. But that is such a huge deal. And I'm already thinking like, maybe I need to restructure my intro because now it does open with the intro music. So now I'm like, oh God, I've embarrassed myself and I haven't even, we're only 10 minutes in.
To be honest, that was an offhand comment from a professional editor.
Yeah.
He said, and I was like, oh my gosh, I so like, because when I've had three total other podcasts in my podcasting career,
Mhm.
and I transitioned them over to that after hearing that, because I really like that when you hear a voice, and you'll hear a lot of people do it. The other thing that I do, this is to kind of like show off my editing skills, and
Mhm.
it's also it's like in a movie where, if you think about like a James Bond movie where they do the cold opening and it's like not necessarily directly connected to the story or just
Yeah.
tangentially, I will often do a cold opening, and that is actually scripted,
Mhm.
where I have written a thing and the guys are playing often characters that are not their characters. And it gives me a chance to show the rest of the world. Like I can show a den of thieves, or I can show a governor somewhere, or I
Mhm.
can have a group of gods talking to each other.
Yeah.
And I can really go heavy on the editing and the music and the atmosphere. And it's very short. They're usually like 2 or 3 minutes long. But it's exactly what you were saying earlier. Like that would draw somebody in.
Mhm.
And that's what I'm going for.
Mhm. Yeah. This is probably way too meta for me to like, because immediately as we're talking about it, all I can think of is ways to improve my own show. So I'm being
Mhm.
absolutely selfish. Sorry, listeners, but that's the that's the nature of the beast.
Well, when you asked me about subjects, there were a lot of different things I could talk about. I mean, we're all, anyone who's listening to this loves D&D and loves
Mhm.
podcasts, and there's a million different things I could talk about. But when you said improving, like there's a million things I could do to improve my show. And I was like, what is the one thing I could probably talk about that would be most helpful?
Mhm.
And I wish someone had talked to me about editing, especially editing a multi-track show before I had started.
Yeah, likewise, and that's I'm fortunate enough to be of I have the capacity to learn new skills relatively quickly, and to there's an element of enjoyment in that exercise for me. So I went from literally no audio experience whatsoever to having some WAV files knocking around that I needed to somehow quote unquote edit, and whatever that really meant to a naive young Danilo 12 months ago. you know EQ, couldn't tell you what it stood for, couldn't tell you what it was. So I have really enjoyed the progression. I'm going to sound like super arrogant now, but I have really enjoyed the hopefully noticeable improvement in clarity in every definition of the word, from episode 1 all the way down now into season 3, where I've had to learn as I've gone on, and improved as I've gone on. And as I was telling you 15 minutes ago, my little intro warm up speech that all the guests get, that's now like honed after
Hmm.
50x episodes of recording, and so has my editing process. So I guess I'm quite fortunate. And then normally I've only got 2 tracks to edit: yours and mine, the guests and mine.
Mhm.
How many did you say? 4 players in Chafing Armor?
So five players. So it's a 6 track
Oof.
editing, and that in addition to that, it is. I have a track for my sound effects. I often will have 2 tracks for sound effects because I may need to do two simultaneously.
Mm.
And then also there's a track for music, and then there's a label track, which I'll get to in a little bit. But before I get to those tracks in multi-track, I do want to mention to the people listening, if you heard all of that and you died inside, um, first of all, you don't have to edit your podcast. I just want to throw that out there. The most popular show in Dungeons and Dragons right now, of course, is Critical Role. It's not edited. That stop and think about that for a minute. I mean, they may throw a noise reduction, before it goes out to podcast, but the show itself is not edited. They do take a break in the middle, and they cut to commercials, so there is
Mhm.
some light editing, but the actual show, the people talking to each other, is not edited, and the music is played live there. So from a standpoint, that is a non-edited show.
Mm.
And so I want you, the listener, if you're too intimidated to begin like a big editing project, you don't have to, because editing will greatly add to the total time that it takes for you to make your show. What I'm here to tell you today is I think that it's worth it. I
Mhm.
think that you will get a better product and you will be happier with what you have if you do edit your show, but I don't want concerns about editing your show to stop you from doing it.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. That's such a nice kind of wholesome idea to have and to communicate. And I'm going to scare more people off now by saying, back when I started, and this is because I was learning as I was going, so inevitably it takes longer because half the time is spent clicking buttons that you don't know what they do. But for each 1 hour episode, it was about 4 hours from beginning to end.
Yeah.
Which at the time I was like, what? Why have I started this stupid hobby? And why didn't I know it would take those so long? And now, thankfully, I've got that, less than half of that time, which is great because then I can focus on the other bells and whistles like transcription and making sure that the promoted tweets are looking a bit more professional and automated to a certain extent and that kind of stuff. So it was exceptionally manual, but you can always obviously improve and get to a point where it is a more enjoyable experience. As with any aspect of any hobby, there's always that initial like, I don't know what I'm doing, and it's difficult, into like, oh, I know what I'm doing, and now I can kind of relish in the the small little bits here and there that I learn and pick up along the way.
Mm-hmm. Well, I definitely want people, when they're visualizing which way they want to go with this, there are two major options. And just as you mentioned, you are recording our conversation on Zoom as a contingency, which is very, very smart, by the way. But what I want people to know is, while I absolutely edit a multi-track show, so each of my players are recording natively, they're recording at their home on their computer. You don't have to do that. If you all talk to each other on Zoom or Discord or Skype, there are numerous ways to record that audio all in one track. If the multi-track is too intimidating, you can do that. It's easier. It's less work for your players. They don't have to record anything. The downside is, if that individual one is lost, you're done. It's gone. The other big thing is you cannot then edit the individual tracks. If one person is louder, one person is softer, you can't manually. There are things you can do at the end, but you can't manually fix that. And if there are any audio issues with one person, there's very little you can do about it.
You can't isolate them.
Exactly. In general, it's going to be a lower quality. At the end of the day, if it's recorded at home on your computer, it's going to be a much higher quality than what you're recording is essentially all of that audio being shot out through the interwebs and then captured. So there's always going to be some degradation there. The other advantage to a single track is that it'll be easier for guests. Now, like, obviously, again, I'm a huge audio nerd. You said I'm going to record this audio, natively. I'm like, cool. I know exactly what you're talking about. I'm sure there are some guests who are like, what? What's that again? So just, if you are planning to regularly have guests, just be aware that there may be a 1-inch hurdle, as they sometimes call it, of getting them to record locally.
We're gonna peek behind the thinking critically curtain a little bit now, perhaps for the first time to this extent. But I couldn't think of a better episode to do so. Where you're absolutely right. Due to the nature of the show, obviously I've had such a fantastic breadth of guests from all experiences and all walks of life, and I'm hopefully proud of myself that no one can obviously tell whether there's been a 1-inch hurdle or not, because I've managed to work with some fantastic, willing and professional people to take that hurdle with me. But it is you're asking something of a stranger at that point, and so you're pretty much relying on the kindness of strangers, which obviously has the risks that entails in your day, as it does in your day-to-day life. But for me, and this show in particular, because the environment is uncontrolled for the guest until we start talking, it's an uncontrolled, it's a variable, right? They could be they could be in the Sydney Opera House, or they could be inside their washing machine. It could be anything. So I think thinking critically could only work on separate tracks. So I have that tight control of those variables as much as I can. Once I have control, I can do what I want. which is quite why I kind of mandate my guests to jump through those hoops at the beginning here.
And it gives you one other option is if for any reason one player something goes critically wrong. I've had twice in the 4 years of Chafing Armor where someone's audio just went, just didn't record for whatever reason.
Mm.
We were actually able to like get the general gist of what they had said and just have them re-record it. And I popped it in, and I guarantee you, no one ever noticed.
Mm-hmm. The magic of post-production.
The magic of editing. Speaking of magic, I did want to talk about, like, kind of like you say, meta. Just a few things that really will change the way you think about your editing. One of the biggest ones is hotkeys or shortcuts, whatever you call it. If you are doing a task more than twice in your editing process, you should consider making that a hotkey. Because it will greatly reduce the time that you do. Now, the perfect example to this is the one that I added early on. There is in Audacity, which is what I use, there is a function called cursor short jump left, very lovely term, and cursor short jump right. What I did is I assigned those two different keys that are right next to each other. And so what that allows me to do is if I've done a complicated edit, whereas like I'm editing on someone's voice and they said, and I decided to take that out, if I'm editing silence, it's not a problem. I don't need to go back. I know I just removed the silence. But if I need to get that just right, I edit it and then I hit that key and boop, it skips back a second.
Yeah.
And then I hit play and then it will go and I can hear it. And that allows me, between those two keys, I can just kind of scooch in the editing, and it saves me so much time because otherwise I have to take my mouse, move to the place I want, click on the place that I want, and hit play. And you wouldn't think that would take that much longer, but when you're constantly doing it, it will save you so much time. So if you find yourself doing an action, not all things can be turned into a short key, but some of them can. And so definitely just think about that in your process, and it will save you so much time.
Yeah, that ties into what I was talking about earlier on, those kind of automation elements. That's one part of them, just to speed up. And it is, for shows such as ours that are obviously quite long in length and have a lot of repeated actions. But yeah, those shortcut keys and that automation it adds up, is what I'm getting at. Over, as I said, if I'm editing an hour-long episode and I have to do that action 200 times or whatever, and even if it's only 3 seconds each, I'm not going to do the maths off the top of my head, but span that across every episode that I've done. Clearly, that's life that I don't want to waste away sitting in front of my computer.
Absolutely. And I want to. One of the things you mentioned before we started recording is mono. I do highly recommend that you record in mono as opposed to stereo. The reason is if you're recording a multi-track show, the size of that file is going to be stupidly big, and the odds of it crashing are going to increase the larger the file is. And the benefit, the higher quality that you get out of stereo is minuscule. But the ease of the entire thing moving more fluidly because you have them in mono track as opposed to stereo. By the way, I have a hotkey for converting mono to stereo to mono. If I get a file and I just hit that hotkey and put it into mono, good to go. So it's incredibly important. The other one that's incredibly important just to think about when you're editing is silence. That, kind of like you were saying earlier with clarity, it's that there's two different sides to silence. One is you want to remove a lot of silence. There's going to be a lot of dead air. You do have the option. I have an acquaintance who tried to show me through Reaper, which is, I believe, what you use.
Yes.
He tried to show me a system that he uses for truncating silence, is what it's called. Is where you go in and boop, pop out all the silence. I have never run that where I was satisfied with it. Now, I don't want to say that doesn't exist. You might be someone out there who's got the settings right, and I don't. But when you're dealing with 5, 6 different voices and all these different things, what I have found is that the computer's just not smart enough.
Mm.
And you will find characters that instead of saying, let's go over here, it goes, over here.
Yeah.
It will clip out because they were speaking just a little more quietly at the beginning or at the end. And a lot of people work into their words or work out of their words. My wonderful player Lee, with his amazing Australian accent, he will often kind of lead into a word like that. And I found when I tried to use truncate, which I did try at the beginning of Chafing Armor, I didn't like what it did. And it's a lot more work to go out and manually remove those silences, but I think that it's really worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And the other side of silence is killing sound. When you're dealing with multi-track, one of the real powers you have is, and by the way, most of my silencing is me because I'm the dungeon master. I'm talking the most.
Yeah.
And what'll happen is if somebody says something important, like, oh, I want to do this, or this is what I say to her, blah, blah, blah. And I don't like, I'm just a little lagged and I start talking and I talk over them. Guess what? I can go in that multi-track, I can select it and hit silence. And boop, I've just removed my voice. And now you can hear them clear as day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So silence is your friend.
Mm-hmm.
You want to remove it and you want to utilize it to make your audio sound good.
Yeah. What I love about sounds so lame. What I love about silence, cool, is that it's despite all the the mechanical nature of editing and the mathematics behind it, which because it's all just ones and zeros and manipulating those ones and zeros at the end of the day. When it comes to like volume and equalisers and compression and all that kind of stuff, it's just manipulating a form of data. But what I love about editing is there's also this human element of understanding the flow of a conversation, which is why the truncate stuff isn't 100% perfect, because sometimes you need that silence for dramatic reasons, to give the listener a rest, whatever it may be. And only really a human who has the intuition of a conversation can really make that judgment call within the context of that discussion, within the context of that particular sentence. And that's why silence, as you said, you can use it to improve the quality by like leaving it in some places, and not just like, I used to be very strict and it was silence was bad. There's a big gap. I can just eyeball it on the waveform and be like, right, take that out, take that out, take that out.
Mm-hmm.
But then now I'm less surgical and more kind of like, actually, no, there, we'll leave that bit in there. That makes sense. That flows a little bit nicer. But it's an intuition that you get with experience, and that's what I kind of love. How it's like these two sides of the same coin. You've got the one very heavy, like luffs and decibels and tracks and mono and file sizes married with like, how does that conversation flow? Should I take out that or do I leave it in because it implies that the speaker is thinking about their answer, which is actually kind of meta information to that sentence in a way. You don't want to imply that they just had the answer off the top of their head, because it doesn't really make sense. Like that those kind of nuances are which I like, the interesting questions that editing asks me when I'm going through a track, which you don't get if you just let the computer truncate the silence.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree more. And I think of everything in movie analogies, and it's in the Daniel Craig reboot when he first meets Q, and Q says, I can do more before I drink my first cup than you can out in the field. And he goes, but I do acknowledge there's someone who needs to pull the trigger. And Bond says, or not pull the trigger. And so exactly to your point is that knowing, part of being a good editor is knowing when to leave the silence in, when there's a pregnant pause, when there's a big moment, to leave that moment. There was a moment where my players had been in a plane and there were these weird canyons that just like went straight down. And there was a moment like episodes and episodes later where you zoom out where they're flying and they look down and they realize it is actually a massive miles and miles long handprint. and that a magically modified Bigsby's hand had been cast thousands of years ago and had like just squashed a Tarrasque, like a bug. And that moment was really big. And if I had edited out the silences in there, it would have taken away from that moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's as I said, it's one of those things that is a learned intuition, I guess, is the two words I would use to describe that, which everybody has, because we're all human beings who talk to other human beings, so that it is there. But because it's second nature, and often people hate hearing their own voice, as I did, but I found a good remedy to hating your own voice is to listen to hundreds and hundreds of hours of it. So
yep,
that very quickly got me over that hurdle, whether I liked it or not. So if we compare our two shows, then, so mine is, I mean, trivial in comparison. As I said, it's just the two tracks, one on top of the other, and they can occupy the entire height of my screen, so it's very easy for me to see, and to align them and stuff. So in some ways, I'm quite lucky. I have edited a couple of episodes which have had multiple guests before, which were an experience. And oddly, it isn't a linear increase. So I was very anxious going in, because I was like, well, geez, just editing me and one guest takes an hour, 2 hours, for sake of argument. With 5 guests, well, that's going to be like 12 hours. But it isn't a linear, you get like diminishing returns. It isn't just a linear increase, and I'm not intelligent enough to work out why or how that is. But it wasn't quite as scary as I thought.
You will notice an increase, but you're absolutely right. Like editing, 6 as opposed to 4 isn't that much more work. Now, I do notice, because I do side quest episodes where like 1 or 2 characters goes on an adventure, and I do notice that those are shorter, as you can imagine, like to edit. But once you get like past 2 or 3, it's pretty much the same. I do want to mention a couple of what I really like when I'm getting a how-to editorial is I want something crunchy, something I can sink my teeth into, that I can use this after listening to this. And, like I was talking about the short keys and silence and things like that. The one thing I want to really talk about before you edit is prepping your file.
Okay.
Because it will make a tremendous difference, and especially when you're multi-track editing. Before you put all the various ones in the master file, I cannot recommend enough just doing a simple noise reduction. Going in, finding an empty space where there's this, that right there, that is the sound that my room is making. You capture that, you select noise selection and get the audio profile, then select the entire thing and hit noise reduction. It'll take a couple of minutes. It'll run through the file. That one thing will make just instantly increase the quality of your show. Because what happens is that those little noises, if you then need to bring that level up, it will proportionately bring up that background noise. And that background noise may be invisible to you right now, but if that person was recording a little quiet and you need to beef it up, you're then bringing up that hiss or that pop or that electrical outlet sound or that fan in the distance that they didn't realize was there. And just doing that noise reduction before you start will save you so much agony later. It's another reason why doing multi-track is so powerful, because being able to remove each person's individual background noise makes a tremendous difference.
And of course, back to the mono stereo thing, obviously it takes longer to do those kind of effects on stereo tracks because there's more stuff to churn through. And the reason I mention that is because I think the first few episodes are just, I didn't know what I was doing, recorded everything default. At the time I was using Audacity and it wasn't stereo. And so firstly I was like, wow, that's a large file, but fine. I don't know. I don't have a frame of reference, so it is what it is. And it wasn't until I read online that people were like, record in mono because you're only using one microphone. So there's only ever one track. I was like, why didn't I think of that? As such, that's so obvious. Like you have stereo because often you've got two. I'm looking at my two desk speakers now. I've got headphones on left and right ear. But when you have your microphone, you only ever have one. And I was like, it's so like slapping me in the face. Obvious. I was like frustrated with myself for not clicking mono because it was like some alien combo box that I shouldn't touch because I didn't know what I'm playing with. But so obvious that it's just like one input means you have a mono track, and that's that. And yeah, I do. Yeah, you know, even when it comes down to the brass tacks, it's just like sending the file size just makes it so much easier. Yes, that does make me reminisce about the early days of thinking critically.
Well, if it makes you feel better, I absolutely edited in stereo at the beginning too, and then just like I just was like, why? Why am I doing this?
Yep.
And then it just changed. It made the whole process so much easier once I changed to mono.
Do you have any other? I'm going to be selfish again now and say,
Mhm.
do you have any other like golden bullets, silver bullets, or special tips and tricks for doing specifically audio? Because I imagine your education dealt with more than just say podcast dialogue. It dealt with probably a whole bunch of stuff, but specifically for what I do.
Well, I do actually. I mentioned noise reduction. So there are technically it's two steps. The second step is two things put into one. I have a hotkey that I do. I do the noise reduction, and then I do limiter and normalize.
Yeah.
And that's you can just think of that as high and low. What it does is it goes through, and this is each individual voice track I do this on before I put them all together. What the limiter and normalize does is it brings your lows up and it brings your really highs down, and it kind of just puts it there in the middle. And what that will do is really help each person sound around the same level. I want to be clear that I have one more step that I do along that line that I do at the end. And there's a reason why I have a label track when I edit. It's because I do all of my voice editing first. All of my voice editing. When there's a part that's going to need a sound effect or music, I, in the label track, say something like, start fight music here, or sound of someone getting their head ripped off. And once I'm completely done editing the voice, I then export all the voice as a WAV file. And you're going to say, wait, WAV file is bigger than an MP3. There's a reason for that. It's because there is a program called Levelator.
Yes.
Yes. And Levelator will go in and it will make everything the same. Now, why, if Levelator makes everything the same, why did I bother doing the limiter and normalize before? It's because of what I said before about the background noise. Levelator will make everything the same the way imagine a monster going like, I'm going to make everyone the same height and just grabbing a person and stretching them. It will distort audio if one is really, really low and one is really, really high. So what you want is them all to be like 80% about the same, and then Levelator will get you that last 20%. But if one is really, really low and one is really, really high, you're going to get what they call in editing artifacts. It's just like these weird, almost electronic sounds of just like, because it's trying so hard to make everything match.
Yeah.
But I love Levelator. It just gives me it's why I go through the extra effort of having that label track that I then re-put in the completely done audio. And then I do my sound effects and music based on that final audio. And that way I know exactly how loud it's going to be. And this is really important when you were talking about the little tricks and all that good stuff is you cannot have your sound effects and music overwhelm the audio. And this is a mea culpa because I have absolutely done this in Chafing Armor. Absolutely done this from time. I go back and listen. I'm like, oh my gosh, why did I do that? But your music needs to be much quieter than you think. And your best friends are amplify. You'd think, wait, what? Amplify, let's make it louder. Amplify, you can go in and scooch it down. You can de-amplify. In fact, I have a hotkey called de-amplify, and I think it's like -15, something like
Yeah.
that. And it just kind of like kicks the legs out of under this big booming bombastic music and makes it more like background music. You also have the envelope tool, which is where you can go and boop boop and make little dots and individually bring down elements.
Mhm.
If you want to get really fancy, like if you have your characters walking into an inn and they're walking out of a rainstorm, you could theoretically use the envelope tool to then make the rain go down into a background. So like when the metaphorical door shuts and they're like, now you're in the inn, and the rain kind of goes back down to a background, that's really cool.
Mm.
I'm not saying you have to do that. I'm just saying that the envelope tool is a really good way to do it.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm glad that I don't have any sound effects in this show. I'm tempted to add in like like public radio boing and stuff now just to like test and prove to people that I can. But no, I'm glad I haven't had to use those yet. But yeah, I used to use Levelator, and then I as more of a part of a learning practice for me, I was like, let me try and work it out myself, and then I went down the rabbit hole of loudness and mastering and the the standards that Apple demands for podcasts to hit -19 LFSI, and I'm like, oh, whoa, I'm way out of my depth. What is all of this? So I have attempted in the last couple of episodes to kind of fudge my way through, I guess, manual normalization through the use of various effects that Reba has, to, I would say, fairly good success. At least the stats of the final file seem to suggest it's broadly good. So I'll take that. That'll do.
Yeah. It all matters. It all helps. It all moves you forward when doing it. I did want to talk about, like we were saying before, like having that editing sense. Is when you're starting, you don't have that.
Yep.
You don't know. And so the question is like, well, where do I add music or sound effects? Like, where do I do this? And the answer is, when you're first starting, just do the combat and do the funny parts. Start with there. Like now, like if the characters are somewhere for, like if they're out in the plains or if they're at a dock, I will actually play, background sounds, that are just the dock very, very quietly. And then when it goes into a fight scene, I transition it into a fight scene music. But when you're first starting, just have the whenever there's combat, it's good to have fight music. You can certainly find that music free in various ways, or for a very low cost of free to use. YouTube does have YouTube Creator Studio, which has a lot of good music you can play with. And also, most of the sound effects, honestly, I get off YouTube. I just capture them directly. One little tip is look for horror. Because if you want the sound of someone getting a lot of really violent things happen in Dungeons and Dragons, and if you need the sound of someone getting their head ripped off, guess what? There's a horror sound for that, and you're going to hear the sound of the that thing, that ripping, that tearing, the tendons. It's very visceral, and a lot of that is in horror sound effects. And so when you put in sound effect horror, ripping or chewing or stabbing, that will get you a lot of those really fun ones.
That's a good tip. And another to add on to that is something I found something recently. I can't remember why I was looking. Oh, it was for the end of season 1. I wanted like a little celebratory noise. The BBC over here in the UK, they've got an archive of not open source isn't the right word, free to access sound effects from their decades of broadcast recording, and you can search for like bell or fireworks or waves, and they'll have the raw sound files that are free. What's the word? Like Creative Commons or whatever it is for being able to use them. So yes, that link will be in the episode description of that BBC archive, because it's quite a few interesting sounds on there.
I will check it out. That sounds great.
So we've talked a lot so far about the, as we've said 100 times, that the meta, the post production of a podcast, and we've touched a couple of times about the differences of, say, a show like this one, where it's just two people chatting away versus an actual play or real play of a ttrpg. I mean, tracks aside, number of tracks aside, sound effects, music. Do you think there are any other kind of special considerations that have to be made when either doing a show like this or doing an actual play? And if so, to your ear, to your trained ear, can you spot an edit, or like when you feel like something doesn't make sense, or the sound changes subtly? Do you think you can spot that? Like, do you ever listen to actual plays and go, oh, they've cut there?
So the short answer is yes. If you edit, it's like if you've been a waiter, like you know exactly when the waiter does something right or wrong. You just know. And if you're an editor, you see everything. The joke that I always used to add is, I think they finally vanished now, but I'm old enough that I was actually a projectionist at a movie theater in the '90s, and when in the old days, the old projectors, you had multi projectors, and so because they just had one reel, and so when the reel was going to change to the next one, there was a little tiny blip in the top left hand side, literally a little distortion. You've never seen it,
Hmm.
but if you worked as a projectionist, I guarantee you saw that, because that meant that you started the other one, and then at the one when the scene would fade out, you would close one screen and open the other one to let the next reel go. And that's my little mind example of editing. Is once you've done editing, you will then see all those little blips. You will hear where they cut just a little too close on someone's voice. You will definitely hear if they use truncate silence, because you'll hear those cut out at the beginning and at the end. You will hear sloppy music editing. If you, I will tell you, I am very cavalier with my music because I keep it very, very low, and so that the side effect of that is people can't really hear it.
Mhm.
But if you do need to edit music correctly, just look for the beats. Just hit that, boom, 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 boom. Most modern music is 4
Yeah.
hits, and all you need to do is just look for boom, 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 edit there, stick the other one on at the beginning of the number one, and 99% of the people won't hear it.
Mhm.
But here's the thing: even if you don't do that, most people won't hear it. But if you're an editor, you will. You will hear it, and you'll definitely hear when they had to do something what I call like catastrophic. Like there was clearly a big problem, and
Yeah.
they just had to scorch the earth, and you'll hear people talking, and then it just suddenly switches. Absolutely, that's very, very visible to a editor.
Yeah, it's something that I always have in the back of my mind, and those scorched earth examples are good for when you can, both in Audacity and Reaper, you can edit the spectrum rather than the waveform. So if there's like a particular frequency you want to cut, rather than just 5 seconds of nonsense, you want to cut a frequency within that for like a fire alarm or some other beep, microwave beep, whatever it might be. You can cut the frequency of that beep, but being very heavy-handed there, I've I've been like, oh, I really can't locate it. So let me just like obliterate most of the frequency here. It sounds for like half a second that person's talking underwater through a blanket, and I'm like, yeah, I can't get away with that.
Yep.
That's a little bit
A
too
lot
much.
of times when you remove something, it's just because I can't save that.
Yep.
I can't save it. It's got to go. Boop. It's gone.
Yeah, that sentence is gone. Just forget about it. It never happened.
hmm And the one that I meant to mention at the beginning, and I definitely want to underline, bold, italics, is sync locking.
Mhm.
if you are editing a podcast and it is multi-track, you must and constantly and frequently and always use sync lock, because what sync lock does is if I remove 3 seconds from one track, it removes 3 seconds from all tracks.
Oh yeah.
And it removes them the same. Because if my sync lock isn't on and I remove Penton Chalice, the spell scale sorcerer's part where there was some weird audio, suddenly he's out of sync now. And he's out of sync for the rest of the thing. And all I can do is manually go in and try to resync him, and it's usually not great. However, when you are done later, you are going to want to unsync because that's how you add the sound effect to the music.
Yes. Yeah.
So I actually my sync lock is on a hotkey. It's B for me because that's how often I use it. And I will unsync, throw the sound effect in of someone exploding or getting struck by lightning, and then resync it. And you just look for that little symbol on the left-hand side in Audacity of when there's a little clock that shows you that it's synced. And when you try to edit, the edit visually looks different. And that sync lock will save you so much time and pain and agony.
Yeah, I there was you're giving me some flashbacks here because I vividly remember editing one track for a minute or something, and then cutting bits out, moving things around, and then got to the end and was like, yeah, that's all worthless because it's they weren't cascaded. The effects weren't cascaded down via sync lock. So I was just like, oh yeah, that's been wasted because there's no way I can work out 7.26 seconds here and that I've cut and 4.387 seconds there that I've cut, but then I added in some silence. Like, there's no way you can reconcile those changes. So yes, yeah, I've kind of bundled that in so I can kind of stack actions with hotkeys in Reaper. So I've got one that is like, I just want to cut just this track, turn off sync, and then when I want to cut both tracks, it'll turn on sync and then do the cut for me. So that's how, hopefully, fingers crossed, he says, I won't fall foul of that again.
Very smart. And I exactly what you said there, that's a really advanced thing, and I really like that. I've never done that. What I want to let people know, just as we're kind of like reaching the wrapping up point, is there is no right way to do this. I've given out some things that I do and that I highly recommend and that I think are very helpful, but you will find your own way to edit. And nobody can tell you what is the right way. It's just the way that gets you what you need the most effectively.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you're trying to do. You should absolutely listen to the advice of people who are already editing, as I do. That normalize and leveling that I do at the beginning, that was from another Dungeons and Dragons editor who mentioned it to me, and I was like, "Oh yeah, no, that's perfect. I love that," and I incorporated that into my flow. And that's exactly what I want people to take from this conversation: is take what is useful to you, throw away the rest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you put it really well earlier on when you said you want to produce something that you would listen to. I think that's a really great place to start. And then, as you said, incorporate the tips and tricks and feedback from other people. But I think obviously at the end of the day, certainly for ventures such as ours, I think, making it to your own standard is obviously the best you can do. That's such a noble goal to start with, and then you can start worrying about these little tricky little bits here and there that the audio files may or may not pick up on. I think it's such a great place to start. I did have one. I did have one weird. This is a very weird question. Now I say at the 55-minute mark, which is probably an editing faux pas because this might be at like the 53-minute mark after all this editing. But whatever. Again, we're way past the looking glass now in terms of my creative process. So in for a penny. Do you think? And again, this is me. I'm outside of this question, but for actual plays, do you think there's a propensity there to kind of alter history in a way? The editor has ultimate power over the flow of the story, just like how you can in court, lawyers can edit and doctor documents so it seems someone's being overtly aggressive when in reality that was taken out of context and doesn't mean something completely different. editors can do that to actual play podcasts, and doubly so for remote ones where everyone's kind of like isolated. Do you think there is a desire to do that, or do you think that adds or benefits, or the overall value that power can bring? Do you think that has like negatively impacted some podcasts, or because you're kind of, again, it's kind of like taking the soul out in a way? Maybe I'm being way too melodramatic, but hopefully you can kind of meet me halfway and pick up what I'm poorly trying to put out here.
Absolutely. Well, I said at the beginning, I am obsessed with editing. Editing will make or break any audiovisual medium. And when you think about like that's one of the condemnations made on shows of like, did this so and so murder someone?
Mhm.
It's like, well, you can edit that to look like whatever you want.
Yes.
You can edit those, you can have one guy talk and then edit in another guy talking, and it sounds like they're agreeing with each other,
Mhm.
but they're really not. That's the power of editing. And what you have to do at the end of the day with the show that you're making, like you said, you want it to be the kind of show you want to watch, the kind of thing you'd want to ingest, is will it serve the story? First, again, going back, it's got to be clear. It's got to tell the story. It's got to be exciting and interesting. That's why you're removing those long gaps of silence and leaving the ones that are dramatic.
Mhm.
That's part of that editing process. The other thing, and this is, I didn't talk about this as much, is I want my players to look cool.
Mm.
Like when my players do something really exciting, when Osokai, the shifter ranger, who's now sadly deceased, leaps on top of a hut, leaps into the air, grabs a sea hag out of the air and slams her into the ground. I want that to be as dramatic as possible. I want you, when you're imagining it, to see it like a movie, and if I have a body impact sound of boom when it hits after we say that happens and he makes his roll, I want them to look cool. It's not about me, it's about the
Mm.
story, and it's their story. I'm the dungeon master who's leading it, but they're the ones who are going through it and telling it, and that's what good editing will do.
Mm. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I'm just trying to process like the profound nature of what we what we've been talking
Mhm.
about for the past hour, and what it slightly starting to take my my savage cuts to some previous episodes a little bit more under a microscope now. But no, is there anything else on the topic of editing that you wanted to discuss that we might have missed?
Only on the most tangential way, but I want to mention this because I think it's important. Is when you're done with all your editing and you've got your beautiful done audio file, I want to recommend that you put that audio file on YouTube.
Mm.
And that sounds weird because YouTube is a visual medium. But here's the thing, YouTube is one of the most searched engines in the world. And it is surprisingly easy to do this. All you do is take any video editing software. I use Adobe Premiere Elements. It costs, I think, $80. There are free ones as well. And put your logo on the screen, as a static image, and slap that audio file underneath it, export it as a video, and throw it up on YouTube. Make a YouTube
Mhm.
channel. This is important because when people are searching for something, think about the last time you Googled something. It showed you like the top searches, it showed you those stupid ads, and then it showed you videos that you could go to. And by the way, the reason I chose the name Chafing Armor, my players suggested way better names, like 100% better names. The reason I chose Chafing Armor is because there wasn't anything else called Chafing Armor. The closest I could find was those little books you could pick up in Skyrim. There was one of the books talked about treating chafing caused from
Uh-huh.
armor. It was like a little joke.
Yeah, yeah.
That was how obscure that particular phrase was. And now I guarantee it, anyone right now, and of course I want you to do it, put in chafing armor. Mine's the first thing that comes up. So when you pick the name for your show, that you should consider that. But I really want to encourage you. In addition to, of course, you should put it out to all the different podcast sites, the
Yeah.
Apple and Spotify and all of that. You should put it on YouTube as well. And in fact, Duke, who's one of my longest listeners on my show, I met him on YouTube because he started interacting with me on YouTube.
Oh, amazing.
And so I want to really encourage that because it's a very easy thing to do. And here's a little extra tip: YouTube is free and it's there forever. And guess what? If you like missed a payment on your Libsyn and they destroyed all of your audio and you didn't have it, stored, guess what? You got it there on YouTube.
And another pro of YouTube is it has a transcription service for videos.
That's true. I hadn't even thought about that. See, I'm learning.
I've been researching it and looking at alternatives, and one a lot of people say is it's free, so you kind of upload the video, let it do its it might not be the best accuracy, but if you're uploading the video, you're uploading the video anyway, right? So you may as well. Okay, cool. Well, thank you very much for sharing your expertise and knowledge on this. The most meta. I thought I'd peaked the meta subjects on the topic of podcasts, but no, there's pushing the boundaries. So thank you ever so much for joining us today. Is there anything you would like to promote?
Just that you can find Chafing Armor on chafingarmor.com. And if you go to all the major social medias, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, you can find Chafing Armor on there as @Chafing Armor. I'm happy to interact with you, say hi. If you have and I want to really put this out there. This episode is about editing. If you have a question about editing your podcast, by all means, direct message me, and I'll be happy to help. Again, my name is Michael Corley.
Oh, you fool, Michael, because
what have I done?
Because once we stop recording, you strap in for another hour because I'm going to talk your ear off. But no, yeah, absolutely. Do check out Chafing Armor, and I mean all that stuff to say from me is thank you ever so much, Michael, for joining us. It's been an fun and educational, the best kind of educational chat. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all, everybody. As usual, for listening at home, please do check out all the links in the episode description to everything we've talked about today. Levelator is probably a good one to check out, having positive endorsements from both of us. Otherwise, thank you all for listening, and good night. But not quite yet, as I have my first Patreon shout out to do. Huge thank you to Matt Street at mpstreet88 on Twitter for supporting the show. If anyone else would like to support what we do and hear themselves bigged up at the end of every episode, head on over to patreon.com/thinkingcritically. Or if that's not your scene, you can also buy me a coffee over at ko-fi.com/thinkingcritically. Love you all, safe home, and for real this time, good night.